Hey there guys, PC Guy here with the news in tech and game for the week, and there are a few news pieces this week that are interesting, although there's no actual major new launches, etc. There are some interesting news pieces and some interesting leaks and stuff to talk about. Let's start with hardware accelerated GPU scheduling. Last week Nvidia has launched their first driver that supports this, and this week AMD has followed suit and launched their new Radeon driver that also supports this, although only on Navi 10 GPUs, so 5700 above. If you are interested in trying out this feature, you'll have to download the Radeon Software Adrenaline 2020 20.5.1 beta, so it's not really a full-on release just yet, and well, don't expect a whole lot of performance increase from this though. Judging by what we have seen of testing done with the Nvidia version, the performance increase is negligible at best right now. It's barely out of margin of error. We're talking about 1 to 2% increase in FPS in some games, with other games still being well, kind of bug riddled and actually crashing, rebooting, etc. when this feature is enabled. So hold your horses on upgrading to this and actually turning this on. There's also some issues at Nvidia's side with recording and streaming at the same time that don't always work. So it's a feature that's still very much in its baby steps. It's not going to give you a lot of results now, even if it works perfectly. See it more as preparation for the future, something that they can build on, and now with the DirectX 11 soon, next generation GPUs, etc., you might be seeing this taking a bit more of a prominent role. The idea behind this is that the GPU will manage its own VRAM instead of Windows having to do that. That could potentially decrease latency between all the pipeline in the GPU where the data is handled and all that stuff. So that could result in improvements in the future, but as of now it's really not worth losing any sleep, and it could potentially cause you issues turning this on. So unless you really want to just test it, I would recommend leaving it off. Next up, some information about the current market share in DIY CPU sales. We have heard in the past from German outlets, etc., that AMD was kind of ahead by miles. Keep in mind this is only in the DIY segment, so people that buy their own parts, lose, build their PC, etc. In the OEM sector and pre-built PC, that is really still the bulk of the market by a large margin. Laptops, etc., also outnumber people like tech enthusiasts like you and me, assuming that you do that, by a very large margin. In that segment, Intel still dominates those deals. Don't just flip overnight to AMD's side. It takes years for that to change, if it will. But on the DI market, it's interesting to see how things are evolving. Intel has recently launched Comet Lake, their 10th Gen series, and we have now some information from Japan on how this has affected the DIY segment over there. According to this news source, the impact has not been that amazing. We can see here 2105 when the CPUs were first available over there. That's when the Comet Lake has hit, and although Intel did regain some ground, it is quite negligible comparable to the fall that have been experienced over the years, especially here when Ryzen 3000 launched. However, I have to say, to try to avoid sounding like a complete AMD fanboy, Intel is actually pretty competitive at this moment with their 10th generation. If you just only game, I could potentially recommend you to get an Intel CPU right now. However, in terms of value, that's a different story. Now the question is, when are the Ryzen 4000 CPUs going to hit? I mentioned a few weeks back that some variants of the 1650 had been kind of dug up on some benchmarks, and interestingly some of them seem to be using the TU106 chip, which is the same one that is used in the RTX 2060 and 2070. This is supposedly an attempt by Nvidia to salvage that kind of screwed up silicon that just did not make it into the 2060-2070 due to some defects, but is still good enough for the 1650 lineup. And now a Chinese GPU vendor has listed the GTX 1650 Ultra graphics card, which supposedly is the graphic card SKU that uses those GPUs that I mentioned earlier. So the pricing is still unknown, obviously. It's not completely known if this is actually a real card or not, but it does seem to line up with the information that we had so far. There is some confusion still if it's going to be called 1650 Ultra or a variant of the 1660. However, it does seem to going to feature a bit more memory bandwidth, and remains to be seen how it will actually perform in every workload. We had a similar situation with some card that was using cut down chips from a higher SKU that was performing as a result a lot better in some workloads than was to be expected from a card of that tier. Let's see if this is the same case here with this model, but in the end it's a 1660 or 1650 tier card, whatever they will decide, and don't expect a lot more performance out of it. The next news piece is something that will probably hurt all of us a little bit, in a way, especially in our wallet, and it is in regards of game pricing for the next generation of games. This has been on an industry regarding the PS5 and Xbox, naturally games, but you can bet that it's going to translate into the PC industry as well if this comes to pass. The interview is featuring mostly talking about NBA 2021, which will supposedly be priced at $69.99, which is $10 more expensive than the previous version on older generation consoles. IDG president and CEO has mentioned and used as an example that development costs have steadily increased in the past several years, while the price for the games has not. He then proceeded to compare it to, for example, cinema, Netflix, etc., where there has been a huge increase in, for example, subscription costs, cinema ticket prices, and cable TV packages, while in gaming that much has not really happened. In a way, I do see his point that the prices have not really increased a whole lot in the past several years. On the other hand, I think he's kind of missing the point that he's comparing prices that are a lot lower and that have increased by a lot higher percentage-wise, but not really in terms of amount. The 17% increase, that is a $10 extra on the game, is pretty much equivalent to the 100% increase on Netflix, considering Netflix's costs are, last time I checked, 15 or something dollars a month. I'm just spitballing here, but if they were half of that and they rose 100%, then it means that they were $750. So we're talking at a 100% rise that is in fact a $750 increase, while the 17% that he mentions is $10 increase in the price of gaming. So he is kind of comparing percentages to actual amounts, and for the end user, what matters is how much dollars or euros or whatever they are going to spend more, and not how much of a percentage it actually represents. That said, I do see how it could be a problem for AAA industry that is spending millions and millions in a game to not have that game scale very well with inflation over the years, while their own employees' wages supposedly do. However, you could also argue that most games, especially big games like NBA, whatever, and Call of Duty, etc., they don't really need to spend millions, for example, on marketing to advertise their games, because they pretty much kind of advertise themselves. So instead of trying to increase the prices in the middle of what could right now, because of the world pandemic and such, be the start of an economic crisis that could last several years or something, trying to kind of fleece people of an extra $10 a game might not be the best move and might actually hurt their sales a bit. Let's also not forget that several years ago, which is his reference point for when the prices were, well, last increased, it was still at the time point where a lot of games were distributed in a physical way, like actual CD boxes, etc. And that really does not happen anymore, at least not to the same extent. So there are some savings there in terms of the actual physical distribution of the game, shipping, all that sort of stuff. So they do save something there as well in terms of the current infrastructure of just downloading the game through Steam, etc. Granted, networks and storage and bandwidth also cost money, but definitely a lot less than physical distribution does. Speaking of games, if you are looking for some storage space for your games, well, Samsung's got you covered. They are apparently in their 870 QVO lineup. It's launching a 8TB SSD, which is going to be priced at the very reasonable amount of $900. So if you have a massive Steam library that you just want to be loading as snappily as possible, then yeah, grab one of those and well, they probably got you covered. On a few more approachable prices, they are also launching 1TB, 2 and 4TB models, which the 2TB models seem to, starting at the start. 1TB is apparently going to cost you $130, 2TB and 4 are going to be $250 and $500 respectively, which is a bit more in line with what most of us want to pay for an SSD. Hold on to your salt, and word of advice, don't take the news from this segment on completely literally. The first and most interesting one in my opinion this week is the first version of an AIB 3080 Ti. So it is actually listed as a 3080 Ti, it's here in the picture, and not as a 3090, as some speculation has been going on lately. I gotta be honest, I always found that naming scheme a bit fishy, and it's kind of reassuring that they're going for the familiar 3080 Ti and not just throwing the naming scheme on its head. It is an Asus version ROG Strix with just a picture of its cooler design with a 3-fan design, big ass heatsink under there from what I can see, heatsinks everywhere. It's not really, it's only visible from one angle, so there's no telling what's on the other side. And I mean this as in, it'd be nice to know if there was any truth to the whole GPU on both sides with different chips, one for ray tracing, one for rasterization. But yeah, there's no way to actually confirm this from this picture. Not sure if the picture is even real, so you know, don't hold me or Asus bound to this design. And I also wonder how much trouble this guy in the corner here is, if he has had anything to do with the leaking of this cooler design. Next up, we have a retailer actually listing accidentally some Ryzen 4000 APUs, which probably suggests that they are becoming soon. They have listed them as expected inventory date of July 17, so that would mean that they would have had them ready for sale and shipping at that point. That gives us about 2 weeks for the APUs to actually launch and be available to the public. The retailer in question is Central Point, a Dutch online store. And they have also, well, when they accidentally put up the listings, they also confirmed some of the specs. These specs line up with all the previous leaks that we had before. An 8-core 16-thread part, the 4750G, the 6-core 12-part, and the 4-core 8-thread part. Last but not the least, some benchmarks have also leaked regarding the Ryzen 7 4700G, also an APU. It's going to be a 65-watt part, and the interesting part is that it kind of matches the Ryzen 7 3800X in terms of performance, at least in the benchmark that leaked, and this is a 95-watt part in comparison. If we scroll down here to the Cinebench scores, it is scoring about 5.1 thousand points in R20 and 2168 in Cinebench R15, which kind of matches its 3800X brother, despite the lower TDP. Both of them are the same thread and core count, so this is a pretty impressive view in terms of its performance. It's kind of the calm before the storm until I assume next month in August, when both RDNA 2 cards and NVIDIA's RTX 3000 lineup are supposed to be announced. No hard date on that yet, but it's what everyone really is kind of expecting, so I am not holding my breath to that, but at the same time I'm kind of hoping that they do, because there's really not so much happening in the tech world as far as hardware launches go, so could use some excitement, I guess. Hit the subscribe button if you enjoyed this video. We could really use some help growing a bit and having a bit of a larger subscriber base. That would help us be able to showcase more products, give you guys more interesting content to watch, and just better videos in terms of quality as well. Hit the like if you enjoyed the video, if you like to follow the news weekly in a kind of a shorter base that doesn't force you to go dig through several sites to find the news that you would like to keep up with, and I hope I'll see you in the next video.